On the 22nd of December, 1963, in a hospital room in Detroit, Horace Dodge Jr. lay dying at 63, the only son of one of the two men who built the Dodge automobile fortune. His daughter was at the bedside, but his mother, the woman holding the family's share of $146 million, was in Palm Beach, and she received the telephone call too late. He was the heir to the largest cash payment in American history, and he had never once owned a dollar of it. His mother paid him an allowance his entire life. His father had left the children no money of their own. By the accounts of his biographers, Latham and Agresta, heavy drinking and a bad heart killed him. And his estate was so deep in debt that his mother had to spend more than $1 million buying back what she had already given him. The Associated Press called him a playboy heir. Confidential, the scandal sheet of the 1950s, had already supplied the epitaph, "The only Dodge that ever ran on bourbon." That was one side of the Dodge fortune. The same money, the same year, two widows at the same starting line, $73 million each. One side ended in a bulldozed chateau and a bankruptcy filing with $330 in cash. The other put its name on a university. It began with two brothers who could barely hear. John Francis Dodge was born in 1864, and his younger brother, Horace Elgin Dodge, in 1868, both in Niles, Michigan, both sons of a machinist. Both were partially deaf from childhood, and neither had much schooling, but both had hands that could read a machine the way other men read a page. The historian Charles Hyde traced the brothers from the machine shops of Niles through a succession of small manufacturing jobs until they arrived in Detroit at the turn of the century, two precision machinists with nothing behind them except the machines they had already built, looking for the right contract. They found it in 1903. Henry Ford needed parts for his new automobile company and did not have the money to pay for them. The Dodge brothers took 10% of Ford Motor Company, 100 shares of 1,000, in exchange for forgiving $7,000 Ford owed them and extending $3,000 more in credit. $10,000 total, and not a cent of it was cash. By the Ford stockholder records Hyde worked through, that stake returned more than $32 million over the next 16 years, about $5.5 million in dividends, $2 million in contract profits, and a $25 million buyout when they sold. The Dodge brothers were not investors waiting on dividends. They were builders. On the 14th of November, 1914, the first Dodge brothers car rolled out of the Hamtramck plant, and by Hyde's production figures, they were building about 145,000 cars a year within 6 years, the second largest automobile manufacturer in the country behind only Ford. John had married his secretary, Matilda Rausch. Horace had married Anna Thompson. Between them, the two brothers had built a company worth more money than either of them would live to count. Within 11 months, both of them were gone. John died of pneumonia on the 14th of January 1920 at the Ritz-Carlton in New York. He was 55 years old, and Horace was at his bedside. Less than 11 months later, Horace died at his Palm Beach villa on the 10th of December, age 52. The death certificate that Hyde located in the Florida Vital Statistics records read atrophic hepatic cirrhosis, a condition of 2 years. He had been drinking himself to death while building the company, and neither brother spent a single dollar of the fortune they made. They left behind 2 widows, 4 children, a company that was building more cars than anyone in the country except Ford, and no plan for any of it. No trust, no succession, no instructions. Just the money and the people who would have to decide what to do with it. The drinking that killed the father would find both of his children. For 5 years after the brothers died, the 2 widows ran the Dodge Brothers Company together. Matilda Dodge and Anna Thompson Dodge, 2 women who had married machinists and found themselves managing one of the largest automobile manufacturers in the country. They kept the plants running and the cars selling and the payroll met, and they did it side by side for half a decade. But neither of them was a builder the way the brothers had been. They were stewards of something 2 dead men had made, and in the end they decided to sell it. On the 1st of May, 1925, Dillon, Reed and Company delivered a certified check for $146 million. The original check Charles Hyde located in the Parsons collection. Time had reported the sale that spring. It was the largest cash transaction in American history. A competing bid from General Motors and J.P. Morgan at $124 million had been turned down for one reason. It was not all cash. The widows wanted the money. Not the stock, not a board seat, not a future in the automobile business. And in wanting the cash, they made the decision that would determine everything that came after. Once the check cleared, there was no Dodge Brothers company to manage, no factory floor to walk, no production line to oversee, no engineers who needed direction. There was only a very large pile of money, and the question of what to do with the rest of a life. One person tried to stop it. John Duval Dodge, John's older son by his first marriage, had been left $150 a month in his father's will, while the widows held everything else. By Hyde's account of the will fight, he had already won a settlement of $1.6 million in 1921, and he challenged the sale for a larger share. He lost. The check was cashed and the shares divided. By Hyde's share count, each widow controlled about 250,000 of the company's 500,000 shares, about $73 million apiece. They had started from the same line, buried their husbands in the same year, and held the same fortune in the same kind of money. What they did with it would have nothing in common. 2 months after the sale, Matilda married the lumber baron Alfred Wilson. Between 1926 and 1929, they built Meadow Brook Hall on the land John Dodge had purchased as a 320-acre farm in Rochester, Michigan in 1908, land that had since grown to more than 2,000 acres. By the Meadow Brook Hall record, the house had 110 rooms and cost about $4 million. When it opened in 1929, more than 850 guests walked through the front doors. A decade later, by the same Meadow Brook timeline, Francis Dodge's 25th birthday party filled the house with the sound of the Tommy Dorsey Band. Matilda was building something. She was turning the money into land, and the land into a house, and the house into something that could outlast the fortune. She had been John Dodge's secretary before she was his wife, and she ran her share of the money the way she had run his office. Anna took a different path. Horace had structured her income before his death. By the accounts of her biographers, the bond yields ran more than $1.5 million a year, tax-free, for life, with the principal left untouched. That was more money every year than most Americans would earn in a lifetime, and the $73 million beneath it sat undisturbed. Anna would never need to touch the principal. She could spend the interest alone and live in a manner that rivaled any family in the country. She did. In 1931, at the bottom of the Great Depression, Anna built the second Rose Terrace on the shore of Lake St. Clair. The architectural record of the house puts the cost at $4 million, about $96 million in today's money, for a house with 75 rooms and ceilings 18.5 feet high, an ice cream parlor, and a gymnasium in the basement. And inside, assembled with the art dealer Joseph Duveen, were pieces of furniture made for Catherine the Great, 4 chairs that had belonged to Marie Antoinette, and a piano that the children of King George III had played. Then there was the yacht. Horace had commissioned a steam yacht 257 feet long for $2 million, the largest steam yacht ever built in the United States, and he named it Delphine after his daughter. He died before it launched. In 1926, it caught fire and sank in New York Harbor, and Anna had it raised after 4 months on the bottom and restored to service. The 2 houses cost the same to build. Matilda turned her share into land and buildings, things meant to outlast her. Anna spent on splendor and held everything else in her own hands. She did not put the money in trust for her children. She paid them allowances, and she decided the amounts, and they lived on what she chose to give. Her son and her daughter would have money of their own only on the day Anna died. That was the structure already in place. One side had a plan, and the other had cash with nothing to protect it from the people holding it. Horace Dodge Jr. was born in 1900, and the fortune that should have carried him was designed from the start to be someone else's. His father had left the children no inheritance. Everything belonged to Anna, and Anna held it. Her son would see money for as long as she chose to give it to him, and he would inherit only when she died. He waited his entire adult life. She outlived him. Anna gave her son $2 million to start the Dodge Boat Works in 1923. For 13 years, the venture ran, by Hyde's account, the one attempt Horace Jr. ever made at building something with the family name on it. By 1936, the boatworks was shut down, and that was the end of building. After it closed, Horace Jr. had no occupation and no business of his own. His mother's allowance covered whatever she decided he deserved. If she disapproved of a wife or a purchase, the next check could be smaller. He could not borrow against a future inheritance, because the inheritance depended on a woman who showed no signs of dying. He could not sell shares, because he held none. The only asset he possessed was his mother's patience, and the drinking was wearing that down year by year. What filled the decades after the boat works were marriages, 5 of them, each a documented drain on what little his mother allowed him, by the accounts of the family. He married women and divorced them, and married new ones, and each time the lawyers took their share and the settlements took theirs, and the money his mother gave him moved through his hands and kept on going. Marriage, settlement, another marriage, another settlement, each one leaving less behind than the one before. By his 5th wedding in 1953, held at his mother's Palm Beach estate, the drinking that had killed his father at 52 had put the son in a wheelchair. Nurses had to feed him. Confidential, the scandal sheet of the 1950s, ran the headline that would follow him for the rest of his life: the only Dodge that ever ran on bourbon. In 1961, he filed to divorce that 5th wife. By his own reported words, in multiple accounts of the divorce, his reason was blunt: I cannot afford the woman. The heir to $73 million could not afford his own wife. He was 61, in the wheelchair, still on his mother's allowance, and still waiting for her to die so the money would pass to him at last. She did not die first. On the night of the 22nd of December, 1963, Horace Jr. died in a hospital room in Detroit. He was 63 years old. His daughter was at the bedside, with his secretary and a former sister-in-law. His mother, still holding the fortune he had waited for his entire life, was in Palm Beach. She received the call that her son was dying, and she did not reach him in time. By Latham and Agresta's account, what killed him was heavy drinking and a bad heart. His estate was so deep in debt that his mother had to spend more than $1 million buying back what she had already given him, by the accounts of the family. She was buying back gifts and possessions that had never been his. She had kept him alive with a monthly check, and now she was paying to settle what he left behind. The Associated Press ran the obituary: Playboy heir. He had lived 63 years as the son of one of the richest men in Detroit, and died owing more than he had ever held in his own name. The fortune had been in the room his whole life, in every room he had ever entered, but it was in his mother's name on every piece of paper that mattered, and it was never in his. Anna's daughter carried a name that weighed more than most inheritances. She was called Delphine, the same name her father had put on the 257-foot yacht, and for a few years she rose higher than her brother ever did. In 1925, by the hydroplane racing record, Delphine Dodge became the first woman to race for the Gold Cup in powerboat racing. 2 years later, President Coolidge handed her the President's Cup. She was the only woman who ever won it. The Gold Cup and the President's Cup were 2 different races. She raced for the Gold Cup and never took it, but she won the race that put a trophy in her hands from the President of the United States. The daughter of a dead Detroit machinist at the White House with a silver cup, on the strength of what she could do behind the wheel of a boat. She married 3 times. Her first husband, James Cromwell, would later marry Doris Duke. Her second, Raymond Baker, had run the United States Mint and had once been married to the widow of a Vanderbilt lost on the Lusitania. The world Delphine moved through was the highest floor of American wealth: heiresses, cabinet members, European royalty displaced by war. She had the fortune and the name and the nerve to race powerboats in an era when no other woman did. And for a stretch of the late 1920s, she was the most visible Dodge of her generation. It did not hold. In 1937, a Hollywood actress named Judith Allen sued Delphine for $2 million over the actress's own husband, an Irish prizefighter. The lawsuit landed in the newspapers and stayed there. The fortune that had bought the racing boats and the society marriages had also bought the kind of public spectacle that followed the Dodge name through every courtroom and society column in the country. By then, the drinking had taken over. Delphine died in a New York hospital on the 18th of June, 1943. She was 44 years old. By Latham and Agresta's account, years of heavy drinking had broken her health, the same arc that had killed her father at 52 and was destroying her brother by degrees in a wheelchair in Palm Beach. Her contemporary obituary said only that she had been ill since April. It did not say what the family already knew. She was the second of Anna's 2 children to be consumed by the same absence of structure that was destroying her brother. No ownership, no occupation, and no reason to stop. The one heir on either side of the Dodge fortune who carried the founder's gift was not on Anna's side at all. Daniel George Dodge was born in 1917, the only son of John and Matilda. He had his father's hands. As a teenager, by the Meadow Brook Hall record, he built an experimental diesel automobile engine, the kind of work that would have been at home on the floor of the Hamtramck plant where the first Dodge brothers car was made. John Dodge had been a precision machinist who could feel what was wrong with a part before he could name it. His son had the same instinct, and nobody on Anna's side of the family had anything resembling it. On the 2nd of August, 1938, Daniel married a young telephone operator from Gore Bay, a small town on Manitoulin Island in Lake Huron. The wedding was held at Meadow Brook Hall. Matilda objected, by the well-documented Manitoulin Island account, calling the girl a gold digger. Daniel married her anyway. He was 21 years old. 13 days later, on the 15th of August, Daniel was at his lodge on Manitoulin Island with his new bride and a small party when an explosion of dynamite left over from building the lodge tore through the site. The blast wounded Daniel and 3 others. His bride was hurt too, but she got to her feet and climbed into Daniel's 250 horsepower speedboat. For 2 hours, she drove that boat through 4-foot waves on the north channel of Lake Huron, heading for a doctor on the far shore. She was injured, alone at the helm, crossing open water in the dark in a boat she had never handled by herself, with her husband bleeding in the stern and no way to call for help. The waves ran 4 feet high and the crossing was long. When she was too weak to hold the wheel any longer, she handed it to a caretaker who had boarded with them. About halfway across the channel, Daniel went over the side of the boat and into the water. He drowned. He was 21 years old, 13 days married, and the coroner would later say he did not need to die. The coroner testified at the inquest, by the well-documented Manitoulin Island account, that Daniel would have survived the explosion. His injuries from the blast were serious, but not fatal. It was the water that killed him. Had the boat reached the far shore with Daniel still aboard, he would have lived. His body was found 23 days later. The search had cost more than $50,000 and brought a 2-man submarine up from Detroit to sweep the bottom of the channel. His widow's claim on the estate, by the Michigan Court of Appeals record, was settled at $1.25 million. Daniel Dodge was the one heir who might have continued what the founders started. He had the hands and the instinct, and the one thing none of the other heirs possessed, which was a reason to build. He was 21 years old, 13 days married, drowned in a lake on his honeymoon. His mother Matilda had already lost her first husband to pneumonia and her company to a certified check. Now she lost her only son to a lake in the northern Ontario wilderness, and the fortune lost the last person who might have known what to do with it. Take the number apart. $146 million. 1 certified check. 2 widows, $73 million each. Follow the money down Anna's side, and here's what it purchased. A son who died a debtor at 63, and a daughter dead at 44. Neither inherited the founder's mechanical gift, and neither built a single thing with the money. The one heir on either side of the fortune, who carried that gift, was not on Anna's side at all. Daniel, Matilda's only son, the one who had his father's hands, drowned on his honeymoon at 21. What destroyed the fortune was the absence of structure. On Anna's side, there was no trust, no legal vehicle that separated the money from the person holding it. Anna held the principal, and her children held nothing. They could spend an allowance but could not build with capital, could not invest, could not take the kind of risk that had made the fortune in the first place. Alcohol killed the father at 52, and, by Latham and Agresta's account, consumed both of his children after him. Horace Jr.'s 5 marriages drained what the drinking left behind. And after the sale in 1925, there was no company to run, no engine to improve, no plant to manage. The founders had needed their hands and their nerve every day of their working lives, and none of that discipline transferred to the generation that inherited the cash. The money did not cause the drinking. It removed every reason to stop. And then the money found Gregg Sherwood. She was born Dora Mae Fjellstad and raised in Wisconsin. A chorus girl who gave herself a new name, she modeled her way south until she reached Palm Beach, which was the destination she had been heading toward her entire life. She married Horace Dodge Jr., the 5th of his 5 wives, and when he died in that Detroit hospital room in December of 1963, She became the legal widow of a Dodge heir, which was the thing the new name had been built to become. For a few years, she lived the way the Dodge money was supposed to look from the outside. Dominic Dunn, writing in Vanity Fair, cataloged what she held at the peak: a Palm Beach mansion, a Fifth Avenue apartment in New York, a Greenwich estate, a house in the south of France, a country house in England, and the yacht Delphine. A jeweler once sued the couple for $125,000 in unpaid bills, and the invoices included 2 gold diaper pins for the baby. Time magazine reported in 1965 that Gregg had collected something like $9 million in out-of-court settlements of suits against Horace's estate and against his mother. She had the money and the houses and the yacht with a dead woman's name painted on the hull. And in 1965, 2 years after Horace Jr. died in that hospital room, she married her own bodyguard, a former New York City policeman. The marriage was the last act of a woman who had everything the Dodge fortune could buy and no idea how to hold on to any of it. 13 years later, in 1978, Gregg Sherwood filed for bankruptcy. Dunn reported the numbers in Vanity Fair: $3.5 million in debt, $330 in cash. Her possessions were sold out from under her by court order, the houses and the furniture, and everything that $9 million in settlements had once placed in her hands. The next year, she pleaded guilty to grand larceny. The charge in the court record was looting more than $350,000 from her own son's trust fund, the one legal structure that was supposed to protect a child's money from the parent spending it. Her son posted her $100,000 bail by the record in the UVA law archives. He asked the judge to spare her prison. The son she had stolen from was the one who paid to keep her free. When Gregg Sherwood died in Palm Beach in 2011, she was 87 years old. She had spent more than 3 decades in what Dunn called reduced circumstances, living in the same town where she had once held a mansion and a yacht and a name that could open any door on the island. By the account of her death, no one came from the world she had spent 50 years trying to enter. The Dodge name had carried her into Palm Beach society, and the money had carried her back out, and at the end, there was no one left on the other side of any of the doors it had once opened. Anna died at Rose Terrace on the 2nd of June, 1970, by the record of her death, having lived past the age of 98. She had held the principal on the bond income for 50 years while her children spent beneath it, and she outlived both of them. Her son died a debtor at 63. Her daughter died at 44. When Anna died, the money was intact, and both of her children were long gone. 50 years of holding the principal, and in the end, she held it alone. Rose Terrace, the 75-room chateau that held the furniture Delphine had assembled, with Catherine the Great's pieces and Marie Antoinette's chairs, and the piano the Children of a King had played, was offered intact and free to the Detroit Institute of Arts as a museum. By the record of the house, the museum declined. The upkeep alone ran more than $100,000 a year, and Anna had left no endowment to cover it. The Detroit Institute of Arts looked at one of the most beautiful houses on Lake St. Clair and could not afford to accept it as a gift. Despite a historic site marker and a listing on the National Register, the $4 million chateau could not be saved. Christie's auctioned the contents, and the chairs that had belonged to Marie Antoinette, the piano a royal family had played, the pieces Delphine had spent years assembling from the great houses of Europe, were scattered to bidders around the world. Then the emptied house was sold to a developer, and in the summer of 1976, the wrecking crews brought down 75 rooms and the 18.5-foot ceilings and the gymnasium and the ice cream parlor until the house on Lake St. Clair was gone, leveled 6 years after the woman who built it died. And the money was still being fought over. As the wire services reported in 1980, 60 years after John Dodge's death, 8 grandchildren and a son-in-law were still litigating a $40 million estate in Wayne County probate court after a 10-month legal battle. The fortune the 2 brothers had built with their deft hands in a machine shop in Niles, Michigan, was being divided by lawyers in a courtroom 3 generations later. $73 million each, the same starting line, the same year, and the same city, and the same last name on the check. Matilda Dodge Wilson had been John Dodge's secretary before she was his wife. She married the boss, buried him, ran the company beside the other widow for 5 years, took her $73 million in cash, remarried, and built a house. In that house, she raised her children, and she mourned her only son, Daniel, the one with his father's mechanical hands, the one who drowned at 21. And then she did the thing no one on the other side of the family ever attempted. She gave the money a purpose that would outlast the person holding it. In 1957, by the Meadow Brook Hall and Oakland University record, Matilda gave the hall itself, 1,400 acres of the surrounding land, and $2 million in cash to Michigan State University to found a new institution. What started as a satellite campus became Oakland University, independent since 1970, enrolling more than 18,000 students today on the same ground John Dodge had bought as a 320-acre farm in 1908. Students walk to class today on land that a deaf machinist from Niles, Michigan, bought as a farm before he ever built his first car. The school outgrew the fortune, outgrew the family, outgrew the name. In 1940, Matilda had become the first woman lieutenant governor in American history, which had nothing to do with the Dodge money and everything to do with the woman who held it. She had been a secretary, a wife, a widow, a mother who lost her only son, and a governor's second. What she had done with the same $73 million that Anna received was make it outlast everyone who touched it. She died in 1967 with her estate intact and her name on a university. Meadow Brook Hall, a National Historic Landmark, is the only structure from the entire Dodge fortune still standing, one house from one widow on one side of the split, and everything else is gone. Rose Terrace is a subdivision, furniture is in private collections around the world. The boatworks closed in 1936. Grandchildren were in court through 1980. The yacht Delphine, the one Horace commissioned for $2 million and named after a daughter who would die at 44, the one that sank in New York Harbor and was raised from the bottom after 4 months, survived longer than the family did. It passed through other hands and deteriorated to near scrap before it was bought in 1997 and restored for $60 million by the yacht's record. Today it is registered in Monaco and it still carries the name. $146 million, 2 brothers who could barely hear, 2 widows who buried them in the same year. One side left a university on a dead man's farm. The other left a name on a yacht in a foreign harbor and a line in a bankruptcy filing that read $330 in cash.